unanimously concluded that bulk collection of U.S. phone records did not break up any terrorism plots. Here's former Deputy CIA Director Michael Morrell, a member of the panel.
It is absolutely true that the 215 program has not played a significant role in disrupting any terrorist attacks to this point. That is a different statement than saying the program is not important.
Morrell said the program had helped analysts figure out terrorists were not operating inside the U.S., likening the collection of billions of phone records to writing a check each year for homeowners insurance, even if your house never burns down. The review panel has urged the NSA to get out of the business of storing those records, instead keeping them with telephone companies and service providers, and getting a judge's okay before doing a search. University of Chicago law professor and panel member Jeffrey Stone.
The concern of the Fourth Amendment, the concern of our constitutional history, is that government can do far more harm if it abuses information in its possession than private entities can.
And the secret Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Court has identified episodes when the NSA gathered too much information and went beyond the bounds of the court's directives. To Utah Republican Senator Mike Lee, that's no surprise.
We've seen this movie before. We know how it ends. We know that eventually, if that much information remains in the hands of government for that long, it will eventually be abused.
Whether to allow the NSA to continue to collect U.S. phone records in bulk, and if not, who should store that data? Those are some of the biggest decisions in front of President Obama. Another recommendation of the review panel, to put an independent advocate before the secret surveillance court, drew flack yesterday from an unexpected quarter: judges themselves. Judge John Bates, former leader of the surveillance court, wrote lawmakers that a special advocate would be unnecessary and counterproductive in most cases. And if experts were needed, Bates said, that should be the call of judges. Panel member Cass Sunstein, a former White House advisor, respectfully disagreed.
The judge sometimes is not in the ideal position to know whether a particular view needs representation, and that in our tradition, standardly, the judge doesn't decide whether one or another view gets a lawyer.
Now it's President Obama left to decide which of many opposing views will prevail and which of the review group's 46 recommendations he'll pursue by executive action or with the help of Congress. Carrie Johnson, NPR News, Washington.
And the president will announce plans for reform this Friday. The NSA says it's open to some reforms. On Morning Edition last week, NSA official Chris Inglis told us the agency is considering leaving telephone records in private hands.
The program would have to have sufficient agility that if you had a plot that was unfolding at the speed that a human or perhaps some individuals coordinating across time and space were effecting, you'd have to have some confidence you could move at that speed.
People closely listening to Inglis included Barton Gellman of the Washington Post. He's received documents from Edward Snowden, and Gellman says it will be hard to keep the phone records program functioning.
They have to do an enormous amount of processing of that information in advance, and that means they can't leave it in 3 different places.
In other words, they can't just leave it with a variety of phone companies and easily just go after it in the same way that they've been going after it recently.
I think actually they can't do it the way they've been doing it at all if it's left in the hands of 3 different phone companies, and I think they've been pointing that out to the president.
The agency might prefer giving all records to some independent third party. Barton Gellman was also listening when the NSA official told us he would welcome a public advocate before the secret court that oversees the agency.
I think Chris Inglis had some very interesting things to say, both about the public advocate and even unbidden, he volunteered the idea of a technology advisor for the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Court.
Explain what that would be.
Well, you have judges who are not computer scientists, who are not national security experts, being asked to decide the legal questions of an enormously complex set of facts. So complex, in fact, that in an earlier case in which one of those judges held that the NSA had been violating the Fourth Amendment to the Constitution, the NSA's response was that there was actually no one here who understood these programs well enough in their totality to represent what they were doing accurately to the court, because the court said it had been misled for a period of years.
So this is a major concession then by the NSA were it to happen?
It seems so, and the question is always in the details. I mean, one of the most revealing things about oversight in this whole 6 months of stories has been what the chief judge of this Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Court said to my colleague Carol Lennig at the Washington Post. He said, "We rely entirely on what the NSA tells us about what it's doing. We have no independent fact-finding or investigative power. We don't go over to the NSA and ask questions and investigate. We wait for them to come to us and tell us what they're doing." So a technologist could advise the court on the meaning of what the NSA is saying, but if the court doesn't have investigative power, it puts a greater burden on other oversight methods.
Other oversight methods meaning Congress, for example.
Meaning Congress, for example, which does have subpoena power and which also has very limited staffing that is both capable of understanding what's happening and cleared to know what's happening.
So I want to play a little piece of this interview that we had with Chris Inglis, the retiring top civilian at the National Security Agency. He had already at this point in our discussion agreed that in hindsight he wished that he had disclosed more. And so that led to another question in my mind. Here it is. Is there a program within the NSA that you think if it were disclosed that there would be significant public debate about its correctness?
No, I don't think so. I have essentially, at the NSA, have about 36,000 pages of requirements that I'm working on behalf of the executive branch. But those all can be traced back explicitly to an explicit authority, either from a court or from some executive branch authority that says, here's your authority to go get that.
He says, I'm only doing as an agency what I'm told by other agencies, and no, I don't think there's anything else that would bother you. As someone who has studied a lot of the documents, Barton Gellman, do you think he's right?
The answer he gave you would have applied exactly the same to the metadata program, to the collection of all Americans' call records. That's to say, they were responding to intelligence requirements, meaning, how do we find out X, Y, or Z? And they were doing it under the authority of this closed system that said it was perfectly fine. And moreover, they were comfortable with the idea that the American public would understand and agree if the program were disclosed. So there could be any number of things they're doing. One that comes to mind, you asked Chris Inglis about the cancellation of a program in 2011 that was collecting all the records of everyone that all Americans were emailing and who they were emailing and who they were emailing. They said they're no longer collecting it under that authority in that manner. It seems exceedingly unlikely to me that they are no longer collecting it at all.
So your instinct is there's more information out there, there are more stories to come.
I certainly have more stories that I think will raise interesting questions for public policy, and I think I won't say any more about them right here and right now.
Barton Gellman, who writes for the Washington Post and is also a senior fellow at the Century Foundation. Thanks very much.
Thanks for having me.
And more facts about the NSA are being reported this morning. The New York Times reports the agency implanted surveillance software in 100,000 computers around the world. You're listening to Morning Edition from NPR News.
And this is WAMU 88.5. Good morning, I'm Matt McCleskey. 39 degrees in Northwest D.C. at 8:19. And it's time to get the latest look now at traffic from Jerry Edwards. Good morning, Jerry.
Matt, good morning. 66 eastbound, the crash approaching 29 Centerville. VDOT says that is now out of the roadway and the lanes are open. On the inner loop of the Beltway, just above the Springfield interchange, had a broken down vehicle. It's quickly moved to the shoulder, but delays getting past that, and then the real slow traffic begins as you head north from Braddock Road and the Robinson Terminal off and on up through Annandale. And then more heavy traffic, of course, to the American Legion Bridge. 395 northbound jammed. The last check had the truck stopped in the left lane as you head over the inbound 14th Street Bridge onto lower 14th Street. If you're going for the freeway, you're okay. The lanes are open. For those lower 14th Street, that was keeping everybody at bay. Elsewhere, Baltimore Avenue and Queensbury Road, just getting reports of a crash. Prince George's County rescue crews are headed there right now. BW Parkway at 202, a crash reported, and still dealing with the leftovers from the crash. Kenilworth Avenue at East Capitol Street. Matt?
Thanks, Jerry. We do have a dense fog advisory in effect until 9 this morning. By late morning and into the early afternoon, we should see a little bit of sun, but then we'll cloud back up by late afternoon. High temperatures today should be in the upper 40s. Tonight will be mostly cloudy with a slight chance of some rain this evening. We could have a few snowflakes after midnight.
Today's programs are made possible in part by Tom and Susie Kahn in loving honor of their younger son, Daniel, who is turning 5 years old and is already a loyal Boston Red Sox fan and WAMU listener.
Support for WAMU 88.5 comes from Innova, offering CyberKnife, a non-invasive way of treating cancer. Information available online at innova.org/cyberknife. and from the Healthy Back Store, offering the Healthy Back Embrace Bed, Human Touch chairs, teeter inversion tables, and cervical pillows at 10 Virginia and Maryland stores. 1-800-4-MY-BACK or healthyback.com.
This is Morning Edition. It's 8:21.
The U.S. Supreme Court today hears arguments in a case testing the constitutionality of buffer zones at abortion clinics. It was 14 years ago that the High Court upheld floating buffer zones to protect patients and staff going in and out of these clinics from protesters. Now the issue is back before a new and more conservative court. NPR's legal affairs correspondent Nina Totenberg went to one of the clinics at the center of the case in Boston.
We're standing outside the Boston Planned Parenthood Health Center, and there's this yellow circle, semicircle around it. And the buffer zone essentially extends from the front door to the end of the curb, right in front. And at each critical place on this circle, on this very snowy, cold, wintry morning, there is somebody trying to encourage people not to have an abortion.
Hi, good morning. Can I give you our information this morning? Please
I'll get on the way out. I'm staying birth control. I'll get on the way out.
We're available if you have any questions.
That's Operation Rescue's Eleanor McCullen, the lead plaintiff challenging the Massachusetts law that imposes a 35-foot buffer zone about the length of a school bus around the entrances to abortion clinics. McCullen looks like the stereotypical cheery grandmother.
I have pictures on my refrigerator of many babies.
She's out here every Tuesday and Wednesday on her mission to prevent women from having abortions.
I meet them here and say, let's just talk a minute before you rush in. You rush in so quickly, and then you come out in tears.
But she says the buffer zone interferes with her mission and is a violation of her First Amendment rights.
It's America, and I should be able to walk and talk gently, lovingly, anywhere with anybody.
You seem to be able to do a fair amount of that despite the yellow line, yeah?
Fair amount, but guess what? Could do more.
Inside the clinic, we meet nurse practitioner Teresa Roberts.
The vast majority of what we do is primary care, contraception, cancer screenings, and people generally feel safe. The buffer zone is one of the things that has helped patients feel safe, I believe.
Okay, let's go take a look. She takes us past a security guard, metal detector, and several layers of electronically keyed access doors. And when we get to an atrium, there's a stark reminder of the darkest days for Planned Parenthood in Boston in 1994 when a gunman killed 2 clinic personnel and wounded 5 other people. Nurse Roberts reads a plaque honoring those killed.
The tree in this atrium honors the memory of Shannon Lowney and Leanne Nichols, dedicated December 30th, 1997. That was the 3rd anniversary of their deaths.
Eventually, we end up at the office of CEO Marty Walls.
Hi, Marty Walls.
This is a new job for her. In 2007, while in the state legislature, she co-sponsored the buffer zone legislation at issue in the Supreme Court today. She notes that in Massachusetts and many states, there are buffer zone laws to protect people going to funerals, political conventions, and polling places.
In Massachusetts, there's a 150-foot buffer zone around every polling place in the state. There's even a buffer zone around the Supreme Court.
Indeed, the U.S. Supreme Court bans all demonstrations, vigils, picketing, and speech-making on its 252 by 98-foot plaza, allowing demonstrations only on the adjacent public sidewalk.
What the court has said is that that plaza is not a traditional public forum.
Lawyer Mark Rienzi represents the anti-abortion demonstrators in Massachusetts.
Public sidewalks are places that people are supposed to be free to exchange information and exchange ideas. And the evidence in this case shows that it is much more difficult to engage with women when you have to stand behind the line and either raise your voice to reach them or run around the line to try to catch up with them.
If demonstrators are such a threat to people at the clinic, he asks, how come there have been no criminal prosecutions for harassment or violence?
In a situation where over 7 years you don't even have a conviction of somebody getting within 6 feet of somebody without their consent, that you don't have that big a problem.
But that begs the question, you see. The statute has been effective, so there has been no need to do it.
That's Massachusetts Attorney General Martha Coakley explaining why there have been no prosecutions under this law or the previous law. She says that prior to the current law, the situation outside clinics was often unsafe.
On a day-to-day